And hello again from Fox News in Washington. President Obama was out campaigning this week, pushing his plan to boost the economy by helping the middle class, and attacking Washington as too focused on, quote, phony scandals. Republicans say they've heard it all before. On Friday, I sat down with Treasury Secretary Jack Lew. Secretary Lew, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be with you, Chris.
President Obama keeps calling for more spending to pay for infrastructure, to pay for education, to pay for clean energy, all things he's been pushing for almost 2 years and all things that Republicans have repeatedly rejected. The president says that the GOP attempts to repeal Obamacare over and over again are meaningless. Isn't this just as meaningless?
You know, Chris, I think what the president was talking about this week, what he's going to be talking about in the coming weeks, is what we need to do to build a better future for America's middle class, how to have a future of better opportunity for jobs, how to have security in education for your children, in health care, in retirement security, how to be secure in your home. These are the things the American middle class worry about, and it's what they want us in Washington to worry about. So we will keep talking about these things because it's what the American people need for us to do.
But isn't it just as meaningless as, because it's been rejected, whether it's good ideas or not, as the Republicans continue to talk about repealing Obamacare? Because that's not going to happen either.
I've worked in Washington for quite a few decades. I don't know a lot of people on either side of the aisle who don't believe in infrastructure, and I don't know a lot of people on either side of the aisle who don't believe in educating the next generation.
But they think that we have a deficit problem and that we can't afford to spend more money.
I think that if you look at where we are today, you have to realize we're not where we were in 2011. We've actually worked together. It's been a messy process, but we've worked together, and we've reduced the deficit considerably. In the Budget Control Act, we reduced the deficit on the discretionary spending side. This year, at the beginning of the year, we enacted some tax legislation that raised the tax rate at the very top for the highest income. We still have more work to do, and the across-the-board cuts that kicked in are not good policy. We think they should be replaced by sensible alternative entitlement and tax reforms. But we've actually accomplished roughly the amount of deficit reduction we all set out to accomplish a few years ago. We're now arguing about the composition. We need to get on with the business of the American people who don't want us arguing about numbers. They want us to build a better future for the American middle class.
Well, let's talk, though, about the budget, because the government runs out of money on September 30th, which raises the possibility of still another drama and another government shutdown. And while the president talks about higher taxes and more spending, or investment as he puts it, the GOP says that the sequester must stay in place. $109 billion in the next fiscal year, starting in October, may be reconfigured, but $109 billion plus billions of dollars more in spending cuts. They say cut spending. Other than the Republicans surrendering, what's your plan to avoid a government shutdown?
You know, Chris, if you look at what's going on right now in terms of our deficit, we are reducing the deficit at the fastest rate since the demobilization after World War II. We need to talk about growth. We need to talk about how do we build that better future for America's middle class.
So are you saying we don't have a deficit problem anymore? We're $16 trillion in debt,
Well,
sir.
I'm telling you that we have a set of short-term and long-term challenges. In the short term, if you look at the amount of deficit reduction we're doing, we were just criticized by the IMF for doing too much too soon, that we should do more later and less now. In the international community, I just came back from a meeting with finance ministers around the world. There is, I think, a consensus in the world community that we need to focus on growth, that you cannot just cut your way to growth. You need to have policies in the short term which help an economy grow, and medium and long-term reforms that put things in the right place for the long term.
Well, Republicans would agree that you need more growth. They'd say, though, the way to do it is to lower taxes and to reduce the regulatory burden. Let me ask you a specific question.
We've seen the results of both approaches. That approach did not work.
Well, we'll talk about the Obama approach and how much that's worked in a moment. But the Republicans say, we want the sequester. That was part of the deal of the Budget Control Act that you talked about, the response in 2011. $109 billion in spending cuts in the next fiscal year starting in October. Will the president sign a government bill, a funding bill, a continuing resolution, or some kind of budget bill that includes $109 billion in spending cuts, even if it's configured?
Chris, the president has made clear, he's told Congress he will not sign a bill if it fixes defense at the expense of domestic spending. I think we've seen in the House, the Republicans have been writing bills that do exactly that. They don't, I think, have a way to solve their own problems without doing that. And I don't think that they could even pass the bills that would result in terms of the cuts to education, to health, to all the things the American people care about.
So are you saying the president would veto a bill, a resolution to the budget shutdown, the budget crisis at the end of September that included $100 billion in new spending cuts?
What I'm saying is that Congress has to write bills that meet the challenge that the president set forth to start investing in our future, and Congress cannot steal from domestic priorities to fix problems that across-the-board cuts have caused in defense. I think the right solution would be to get together and have a sensible set of alternatives to replace across-the-board cuts that were never meant to take effect. They were meant to be bad policy that would drive Congress to do its work and adopt sensible policy.
Will the president veto a bill that has the sequester cuts in it?
The surprising thing is that, a couple of years after everyone agreed this was bad policy, there are people who are now claiming credit for things that were designed to be bad policy and senseless across-the-board cuts. That's truly surprising. I think if you look at the way Congress has been dealing with these across-the-board cuts, it reflects a substantial division even on the Republican side. You see senators like John McCain and Kelly Ayotte and Lindsey Graham who think it's terrible for our national defense to leave those across-the-board cuts in place.
All right,
there is a better alternative.
Let's switch to the debt limit. The House Speaker Boehner said again this week, no increase in the debt limit without an equal or greater amount in spending cuts. When, first of all, are we going to hit the deadline? I know you're shifting money around. And secondly, short of a Republican surrender, are you going to make a deal to how do you avoid going into default?
Chris, to be clear, we hit the debt limit in May. We've been using what are called extraordinary measures since then to pay our bills day to day.
And when do you hit the deadline?
And Congress needs to do its work. It has to stop looking for what's the last possible moment. No one can predict with absolute accuracy, and they can't take the risk of making a mistake. They should get back after they take their time off in August, and they should finish their work and get it done so that there's no uncertainty about America's ability to pay its bills. I got to tell you,
what's your plan to avoid the default? What's your plan to avoid the default with Speaker Boehner saying there's got to be spending cuts?
So in 2011, it was the first time in American history that you had one side arguing that default was an option. It was not an option and cannot ever be an option, and they know that. They have to do their work. They have to pass it. The president has made clear we cannot negotiate about whether or not the government of the United States would default. It was a mistake in 2011 to have that debate. It hurt the economy. And I think Congress knows that it has to deal with this.
But Secretary Lew, this idea of a clean debt limit bill is not written in stone. The fact is, when you were the deputy director of OMB back in 1997, that Bill Clinton signed an increase in the debt limit that was tied to balancing the budget, a deal with Congress. So it happened, it was good enough for Bill Clinton. Why can't Barack Obama make the same deal?
Chris, things changed in 2011. In the 1990s, the 1980s, all the previous debt limit debates, there were discussions about what should be done as the debt limit is resolved. 2011 was the first time there was a debate about whether or not to default, where there was actually one side arguing that default could be managed. That is just wrong. It would be terrible for the U.S. economy. It would be terrible for the world economy. It's irresponsible. And I think Congress learned that lesson in 2011.
All right. You talked about the economy and you talked about the president. I want to put a couple of statistics up here. First of all, let's look at growth. Growth in the fourth quarter of last year was 0.4%. It was 1.8% in the first quarter of 2013. There's a lot of people believe it's going to be less than that, close to 1% in the second quarter of 2013. I also want to put, because the president talked a lot about inequality, I want to put up some statistics about the middle class and how it's done under President Obama. Let's put those on the screen. Median real household income is down 5%. That's $2,718 a year on average since the recession ended in June of 2009. So in the recovery, median real household income has gone down. The percentage of Americans in the workforce has dropped from 65.7% to 63.5%, again, since the recession ended. Point of all this, a lot of numbers. The middle class has fallen behind. For all of this talk about equality, the middle class has fallen behind under President Obama.
So, Chris, you've just made a case as to why the things the president was talking about this week are so important. We need to focus together in a bipartisan way on the things we can do to help America's middle class. The truth is, the core of our economy is strong, it's resilient, and we've been growing. We've been growing for 40 months. We've seen job growth for 40 months, GDP growth, economic growth for 4 years. It's not fast enough. We want to do everything we can to speed the pace of economic growth and job creation. That means we have to address the issues that the president laid out this week. We need to do the things to help build a foundation for better jobs.
Well, let me ask you one question. If you're so interested in creating more jobs, why not approve the Keystone Pipeline, which would create tens of thousands of jobs, sir?
Chris, I think, as you know, the Keystone Pipeline is being reviewed. It's been in a process. It was slowed down because
several years it's been reviewed. I think, what, 3, 4 years?
There were some political games that were played that took it off the path of completion. When Republicans put it out there as something that was put on a timetable where it could not be resolved, it caused a delay. We're now getting to the end of the review, and we'll have to see where that review is. But I think playing political games with something like this is a mistake.
I want to ask you about one other part of President Obama's speech this week. Take a look.
With this endless parade of distractions and political posturing and phony scandals, Washington's taken its eye off the ball. And I'm here to say this needs to stop.
Question: does the president think that the IRS targeting of conservative groups is a phony scandal?
The president has made clear, I have made clear, that the mistakes that were made in judgment, very bad judgment, managing the 501c4 program were unacceptable, and they had to be fixed.
So that was not a phony scandal?
Well, he appointed an acting IRS commissioner who's taken decisive action, clearing out all the people who had supervisory responsibility for any of the decisions leading up to that. He's put in place methods to make sure it doesn't happen again. I think that we have to look at the facts. There have been a lot of investigations. There have been a lot of hearings, IGs, the Justice Department. There is no evidence of any political decision maker who was involved in any of those decisions. And I think the attempt to try to keep finding that evidence is creating the kind of sense of a phony scandal that was being referred to there. Well, there was a problem. The problem has been addressed, and there was no political involvement that there's any evidence of.
Well, let's talk about that. On May 15th, the president directed you to investigate the IRS scandal. Again, take a look.
I directed Secretary Lew to follow up on the IG audit to see how this happened and who was responsible, and to make sure that we understand all the facts.
So if this is supposedly behind us, it's been more than 2 months since he directed you to lead the investigation. Explain to me how it was that conservative groups were targeted by the IRS.
Well, look, first of all, Chris, what we found out as we went through to find the facts is that there was equal opportunity bad judgment. It was conservative groups, it was progressive groups.
At equal numbers, or not grossly disproportionate conservative groups over progressive?
There are an equal number of groups. The bad judgment was equal opportunity.
But not the number of groups.
No, but
it was like, I think if over 100 as compared to maybe a dozen.
But you have to look at how many cases of each there were. And
who was responsible for it, sir?
Look, there were a number of supervisors, all career, who exercised bad judgment, who were relieved of their responsibilities. I think that what happened there is unjustifiable. It is not acceptable to have the kinds of screening for left or right, liberal or conservative, where you're targeted in any way for your views. Well, there's no political official who condoned it or authorized it.
Well, let me ask you about that, because an IRS official, Carter Hull, told Congress this week that he was ordered to send applications from 2 Tea Party groups for tax-exempt status, to send them to the IRS Chief Counsel's office. That's William Wilkins, who's a political appointee. As a political appointee, he reports to you, to your office. Have you asked William Wilkins, the IRS Chief Counsel appointed by President Obama, what involvement he or his office had in all of this?
Now, Chris, to be clear, there are 1,600 lawyers in the Chief Counsel's office, and there was no suggestion that this went to the one political person in that office. There's no evidence of it. There has been no evidence of it.
Well, wait a minute. Have you asked him?
Chris, I am leaving the investigation to the proper people who do investigations. I don't think it's appropriate for me to do the investigation.
Somebody in the Treasury Department asked William Wilkins what he knew about this.
Chris, there is no evidence that this went to any political official.
Well, there hasn't been an investigation. The Justice Department investigation isn't complete. The Inspector General never conducted an investigation. He conducted an audit. So where's the investigation?
An awful lot of time has gone into asking a lot of questions of a lot of people. I'm not saying it's done, and we will cooperate with all of the ongoing investigations. We have and will. I'm just challenging your assertion that something has been shown when no evidence has been produced to show it.
I'm just wondering why the questions haven't been asked.
Well, we have to look at evidence that comes forward and respond to it.
Finally, on a different note, when you were nominated as Treasury Secretary, and let's put this up on the screen, your signature, that's the upper one, and it got a lot of kidding, in fact, from the president, who said it looked like the icing on a Hostess cupcake. Below is the signature that's going to start appearing this fall on money, because you're, as the Treasury Secretary, it appears on money. That's going to be on the $5 bill. And it looks different. So the questions I have are, one, why'd you change your signature? And two, how did you change your signature?
Chris, I've been working on my handwriting for many decades, and I obviously still have some more work to do.
But I mean, did you decide that isn't going to do for the currency of the United States? I got to have a different signature?
Yeah, Chris, I will confess to having a certain challenge with penmanship, and I always do my best.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. Thanks for coming in. We very much appreciate it. Please come back. Always a pleasure, sir.
Good to be with you, Chris. Thanks.